Well, good evening. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our live stream after our summer break. This is our new slot, remember, 9 till 10 on a Tuesday. And we've got lots of interesting guests lined up for the weeks to come. I hope you've had a good summer. We've had a great family holiday. We went to London for a couple of weeks. We do house swaps. So we really enjoyed that. Seeing the site, I'll tell you a little story about that in a minute. Right, so we've been gearing things up again with the Scottish family party, ready for the term and the year ahead. Really, as soon as we were back from holiday trying to get things going again, the Scottish government slipped out its transgender guidance for schools. That's going to be a very hot topic for us. We've made videos about it already, but we'll be raising that issue, shall we say, in lots of different ways. You've seen the sort of tricks we get up to draw attention to issues. Well, we're going to be employing all those and a few more on this issue. So there'll be opportunities for you as well to be able to make your feelings known about the government's policy that teachers can have a conversation with a pupil, agree that they're going to change gender, change the name they're going to call them, change the pronouns they're going to call them, and all this can take place without the parents knowing anything about it, which is just beyond the pale in terms of cutting out the parents, and also in terms of leading the children down a road that's in many cases going to be very harmful, and they might well come to regret. Yes, that's going to be a big issue. We've got our teeth into it already, but there's lots more to come. It's also been great since coming back on holiday, been on GB News a few times. They got in touch, and I've been invited on, I think it's 4 times now, to talk about various issues. So that's really good. I mean, GB News is intended to offer a platform to a wider spectrum of opinion than the sort of mainstream media, in particular the BBC. So it's really appreciated that opportunity. So hopefully there'll be more of those as well, to be able to get some TV and media exposure, which we deserve, but we're denied in a lot of other media channels. Right, our conference approaches on the 13th of November. That's a Saturday. Tickets will be available for that very soon. Within the next couple of weeks, you'll be able to buy tickets. The conference itself, during the daytime, that's in Dunfermline, it's going to be seated cabaret style. So you'll sit around a round table instead of being sort of crammed in rows. Lunch is included. Then in the evening, this is not part of the conference, it's an extra thing in the evening. We're going to have a dinner in a very nice local hotel that you'd be very welcome to join us for as well. It's not a political event, it's a social event with a bit of entertainment, etc. That's 13th of November in Dunfermline. We're really looking forward to that, and we hope you'll be able to join us. We had 100 people at our first conference 2 years ago. We had to go online last year. So we're hoping for a couple of hundred people along to our conference. So do join us for that. Right, another thing we've got coming up, we're delighted to say, is we're able to get back into having proper meetings around the country. That was a really important part of what we did before lockdown came along. Just a reminder of our lockdown policy is to remove all restrictions, even the remaining ones now. But we've got a very full program of meetings coming up over the next month. So it's very likely there will be a meeting somewhere near you. I'll just run through them very quickly. The details will come out on social media very soon. They went out in the newsletter today. We've got meetings coming up in Peterhead, Aberdeen, Glasgow, Hamilton, Paisley, Edinburgh, Ayr, Dumfries, Kirkcaldy, Dundee, Stirling, and Jedburgh as well. We just fixed that one up today. And soon there'll be ones, Highlands and Islands, including Inverness, West Lothian. We're going to have a meeting in Haddington, etc. So keep your eye open on social media. Those details will be coming out. It would be great to see you in person at a meeting. Now, I said I'd share just a quick story when I was on holiday. This is not a big deal, but you might just be interested to hear it. I went to the London Transport Museum, which is the museum run by London Transport to show tube trains and buses and whatever history of transport in London. So it was all fine. But in London, currently, at some of the tube stations where they have their traditional name of the station with the red circle behind it, instead of being a red circle, it's the transgender flag, or it's an LGBT flag in the stations. And then in the London Transport Museum, there's a huge display on the wall, a huge transgender flag in particular. There's an LGBT one as well. But the transgender one was really prominent. So I went up to the counter and I said, I haven't come here to be preached at about social issues. I've come here to look at buses and trains and things. So I object to you putting that big transgender and rainbow flag there on display. I said, it contradicts my beliefs. I said, you may as well put a big sign up saying, we believe, for example, the teachings of the Catholic Church are wrong about human sexuality, or other Christian denominations, or most Muslims or Jews. And I said, I was walking around the museum. I saw an Orthodox Jewish family. I saw a couple of Muslim families. I said, I'm a Christian. There'll be a lot of people here today with their children who will not like that. They'll be resenting that. I said, probably almost all of them won't say, because they'll think they'll be wasting their time because you won't listen. But the museum is not a place for that sort of campaigning on controversial issues. So they didn't really have much to say. I got an email later, and we sort of argued the case. They said, oh, we have to represent everybody's stories. I thought, that's just complete rubbish. You know, what do you mean by everybody? I mean, in the Transport Museum, if they wanted a little bit about how London Transport had adapted to disabled people, I don't know, there was a bit of that, but that would be interesting. Yeah, that's valid. That's about London Transport. But transgender people, I mean, what's that got to do with London Transport? Anyway, so I argued my case. I mean, I knew they wouldn't listen. But I finished by just saying, basically, I want my money back. And I was quite shocked that that's exactly what they did. They gave me a complete refund on going there. So give it a try. And if you go somewhere and see something like that, have a word with them, and who knows where it might end up. Now, another piece of news, actually, since we had the break from this, and that is, you'll remember my case with the General Teaching Council for Scotland, where I was sort of hauled before a hearing for saying that children need a mum and a dad, ideally. So it took about 3 years. I had the hearing. The case basically fell to bits, and they said I was sort of innocent on all charges, if you like. So I then made an expense claim against the General Teaching Council for Scotland. I made a very realistic calculation, not ridiculously exaggerated, not exaggerated at all. And I calculated that I'd spent 127 hours dealing with that case. So I said to him, right, this is the amount of money I would earn if I was doing tuition or whatever for 127 hours. So I'm claiming that not as compensation for the stress or whatever, but just the expense of using 127 hours of my time on a futile case that was just thrown out completely. So they responded in the middle of July and basically said no. So it was just tough. In other words, we can put teachers through whatever we like, no matter how unreasonable, no matter how untrue the allegations are, because they were found to be untrue. They were not proved. They can go ahead and do that, and that's just bad luck for the teacher. So as the saying goes, the process is the punishment. So other teachers will think, or if I say something like he did, what will I have to go through? GTCS will think, we can put someone else through that. That will really teach them a lesson. I mean, who cares if the case gets thrown out at the end of the day? We'll have put them through years of stress and uncertainty, and that will teach them a lesson in any case. That's the way the system works. Right, I'll introduce our special guest very, very soon, but a couple of other things. Our guest next week is from the United States of America. I won't tell you more about him, but we can meet him next week. And the week after that, our special guest is Reverend Bernard Randall, who you might well have come across in the news. He was the chaplain at a school in Nottingham, but was fired for preaching a sermon in which he said that the pupils didn't necessarily have to agree with every message presented by the school, particularly in the realm of human sexuality. And he got fired. It was a very big media story. It's going to be fascinating to speak to Bernard, and it's going to be fascinating to compare notes, because we've got quite similar stories in some ways. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing him, but that's in 2 weeks' time. Right, just before our special guest, I remind you, if you're watching on Facebook, apparently there is some way that you can subscribe to our live streams. Apparently Facebook doesn't show our live streams to as many of our followers as it used to. You have to subscribe or follow or something. So if you look around your screen, if you can see some button that looks like that, do give it a click if you want to make sure you don't miss these. Similarly on YouTube as well. If you want to make sure that you don't miss these on YouTube, then do click the notification bell or subscribe if you're not subscribed as well. And that should make sure that you are alerted to the live streams when we do them. Right, on to our guest for this evening. Our guest for this evening is a member of the Scottish Family Party, a relatively new member of the Scottish Family Party who lives up in Aberdeen, and his name is Jakub Kurpanik. And he's from Poland, and he's just embarking on postgraduate, on PhD studies at the University of Aberdeen in the area of philosophy, particularly in terms of moral philosophy and political philosophy. And he's a very interesting gentleman indeed. I've had two chats with him. I had one a few weeks ago, I had one earlier on today, and he's got a lot of interesting things to say, and I learn a lot when I talk to him. So hopefully you will enjoy and find interest in what he's got to say tonight. So welcome to Jakub. Right, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a real honor and pleasure being here with you.
I'm going to say we're really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say, because I think you've got a lot of insights into issues that are very relevant to us in Scotland, and a perspective of coming to Scotland as a relative newcomer as well. So I say we're really looking forward. So do you want to tell us a bit about your journey? What's brought you here?
Well, what brought me here, it's a little bit of just a common story. I think that it's relevant to many people. And the story short is I had a friend who came to Scotland because he had he had a family in here. So he joined the Scotland first, and he was kind of advertising the quality of life and basically the opportunities that the Scotland can provide to me. So I said, I might as well just carry on and see how it goes. So I basically came here. I came here only 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. And since then, I've learned a lot about how uniquely quality Scotland is, and how many of the things that we take kind of for granted actually comes out of the Scotland and the Scottish mind, if you can, if you allow me to say so. And I was astonished because while I came here, I thought the first thing for me to do would be just to learn a little bit of a history of the place in order to get a little, a better understanding of what I'm dealing with. And more I dig into the history of Scotland, the more I went baffled about how much of the impact into the world the little sorry, I do apologize, and I hope you forgive me for saying the little nation of Scotland actually managed to provide. This is unmatched in my opinion, and for this very sole reason, it's worth. And I would encourage anybody who has a little bit of a time and means to come to Scotland and see it for itself, because this is for me incredible place.
Yeah. Now I have to say I detected just the slightest hint of a Scottish accent.
Oh, did you?
I did. The way you said Scottish, just a hint.
Oh,
just a
okay.
hint.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
So tell us about your studies in Poland and what you're embarking on in Aberdeen.
Well, to be honest, if for you to get a better understanding about myself and the very urge for me to go and do some as popular thing as going and studying philosophy, because this is like a commercial thing to do, obviously, for me it was more about my father. So my father was a theologist, and he was basically a Roman Catholic theologist, to be exact. And he introduced me into this realm of transcendency and the thinking about the things that we kind of take for granted, and we think they are kind of part of us, like spirituality, but it should be kind of kept at distance. The things that we kind align with the spirit and with the religion, it's all cool and it's all great, but we should keep it at distance because it won't help us by any means in our like day-to-day life. And my father managed to kind of introduce me into a very opposite way of thinking, in the thinking that those are the very essential things, and your relation to the things will determine everything that you're going to do in your day-to-day life. And for me, that was the beginning. So I wanted to be honest, and that was the origin for me. I wanted to be different from my father. I wanted to make some addition to the world, and I thought being exact as my father and following his steps would make no addition to the world whatsoever, because he's already better than I was at the stage I was making the decision. And so my decision was to go the very opposite way. And instead of going studying theology, I went to study philosophy, which I referred at that point as being secular, not that much attached to the spirituality, but more embracing the power of our reason. So I went to study philosophy, and then I think it was a second year when I kind of made the thing quite solid. I realized that there is only, among the many ideas and an incredible realm of reason capacity, uh, the whole ideas are being kind of narrowed into a very specific way, and I want to challenge that way of thinking. And it was not, as you might probably guess, not really greatly recognized as a virtue on my university. So I had a little bit of a clash there. But I managed to graduate my master's degree in philosophy in Poland. And since then, basically, well, I felt in love in philosophy. I felt at first what the philosophy gave me was to understand that I might disagree heavily with someone and still appreciate his intentions, because it's not the case, I would claim, that everyone who claims that the things are so different from the ways I claim they are, to have a bad intentions behind it. I think that many people here and back in time, all they did is try to describe the reality the best they could. They had the urge to do so in the first place, and they had the means to deliver it, which is admirable as well. And just not by the intentions, or just not judging those people, but seeing the results of their ideas is what we should be
Yeah,
focusing much more
yeah.
about.
I have to say, I share your attraction to philosophy. I actually studied philosophy for a year. How long ago? 20 years ago now. I took a
Oh,
year off from my job and went to university. And most of what I did was study philosophy. And it's one of the best things I've ever done, I think, because it opened my eyes to a huge realm of thought. And I
yeah.
now find when I look at an issue, a moral issue, or a political issue, even theological issues, I'll read different people's points of view. But it's when I get to reading a philosopher, I often think, oh, thank goodness. Right, someone who I feel is on my wavelength. I feel they're being clear about
Oh,
what they're
yes.
thinking. They're laying out their arguments in a way that's properly structured and coherent. It just appeals to me, that way of thinking. So I definitely share your attraction to philosophy there. But I think it's got its, it's so broad. There are people who are philosophers with some very strange ideas, and there are some branches of philosophy I would say are not particularly intellectually rigorous. But in general, I find it's a very it's just on my wavelength. It just appeals to my way of thinking.
A little hint of criticism towards the philosophy, which I kind of sensed in your last sentence, was I can answer to that in this sense. I think we can observe a little bit of dismantlement in philosophy in after the 1960s, or in the 1970s and 80s, which are, in my opinion, directly kind of targeted in order to take the philosophy out from the people, and making it looking like a flying in the clouds, and one overthinking about the things that have little meaning, if any, and it's just basically wasting time. But that kind of sense of what a philosophy is very, I think, the farthest from the truth that you can think of. Philosophy is, if you would take another thing like carpentry, or plumbing, or anything else, you might, I think everybody can easily imagine two plumbers, one being superb with his skill, and enabling him to deliver anything or resolve any problem. And you might have an apprentice plumber who would just kind of, you know, try to fix the job by the poor attempts of applying one or a second or the third way of how to deal with things and see the results, and then, you know, more randomly a kind of approach. Philosophy, in the very kind of digested, the very core sense of thinking, is just treating thinking as a skill, and wondering what can we do to improve the skill, to make the skill being better.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we'd better move on to our key topics. There's lots of things we could have talked about, but we picked a couple of key directions to take things in. And the first one is, I mean, you look a lot at the philosophy of education in different aspects, and you said you'd made some study as well of sex education in particular and its history. Now, I have to confess, I'm pretty ignorant of the history of sex education, so I'm fascinated to hear it. Tell us a bit about it. Where did it start? What was it all about?
Well, it's a hard thing to say when did it started. Whatever I'm going to say, that you're going to find thousands of people claiming that this is the wrong point to pick or wrong way to choose. But I'm going to claim, and I'm going to say this. I think the history of sexual education started with two names particularly, and those names are Wilhelm Reich, which was an Austrian philosopher, and Georgi Lukács, which was a Hungarian philosopher. And those two individuals, they had an idea or the hope, how can they dismantle the current state of affairs for which they actually claimed are a very harmful to the overwhelming happiness that the people should and supposed to claim as the goal. And the sexual educations for them was just a means. It was never a goal. It was just a sort of tool to make life less bearable, or to introduce more hopelessness into the life, because they thought, or their thinking was, that the current state of affairs, the state of affairs, that you have an owner and the worker, as it was described by the Marx, that you have this clash between those who have and those who have not, and those who need to work. That this very setup, with all fails that they both described, and I'm going to say quite brilliantly, they did actually manage to describe the flaws within the system. They thought the only way to combat this system was to make life less bearable, or more hopelessness, or alienated. That's actually one of the terms in Marxism that is very common, and you can come across this very word quite often. It's alienation.
Are we talking 19th century here? Late 19th century?
We're talking no. We're talking about the very early 20th century here. We're talking about Wilhelm Reich. On its own, he was a fascinating individual. He was a student of Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud, the very father of psychology, as we might claim. But just taking that, the validation that we now grant the branch of human intellectual research, which is psychology. And some people even claim that psychology, being a part of the medical field of science, is appalling to me, because Sigmund Freud was no one else but an individual trying to describe that the very purpose of life, or reductive way of describing the purpose of life for us, kind of opposing the true world, the thinking, when the religion kicks in, because. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go back a little bit. Originally, the thought was this: you have a real life, in which we struggle to find the purpose, because you always are being locked into very certain contexts, and those contexts are changeable, so you cannot fix yourself into any. It's really hard to find any purpose of your life or your existence within those interchanging contexts you're finding yourself in. So the response to that kind of recognition was a religion. That was the recognition of the 19th century philosophy. The sole reason for existence of the religion was just to ease this pain that we are constantly seeing ourselves in a changing context. And so it's so hard for us to find the purpose of our life. And living a life without a purpose, it's basically contradicting our reason. Because why would you? So then the concept of the true world, it was actually a 19th century concept that tried to generalize all the religions, kicked in. And then there was a Sigmund Freud. I'm sorry, Sigmund Freud, who came about, and he said it's all false thinking. The very purpose of our life is biological only, and solely biological, and it can be translated to reproduction. Everything that we do is kind of revolving around sexuality, therefore, because that's the only purpose in life we have, is just to reproduce ourselves, make more of us. And then he said that the structure of the reality that we find ourselves in, he found it himself in for sure, was a suppression of the sexual realm of our humanity. And this suppression, he then concluded, was the main cause of all the pain and the sorrow that people experience in their life. Then you have a guy, but never Sigmund Freud went that far to claim that there is a certain knowledge of sexuality should be presented to a youth or to the children. He always thought, up until the end of his life, as far as I am aware, that this is a restricted to adults. You need to reach the certain level of self-awareness in order to kind of think about those things, and children should be kept away and bring about into very classical way. But his student, Wilhelm Reich, was his very student. He was the guy who was sitting in the class, watching his master, and trying to make the best out of what he understood Sigmund Freud was trying to tell. And this guy said that this is actually the key point. The key point to dismantle this ongoing theme of Marxism, which is oppression, which is a powerful group of people oppressing the less powerful group of people. The mechanism is fed by the very obedience that comes from the restriction of our sexuality. And his response to it was just let the sexuality be introduced to our children, make the children be more flexible into our reproductive well, I don't know, a reproductive part of who we are, how we recognize, how we see ourselves. And by this doing, we are going to dismantle all the restrictions that the current state of affairs is actually inflicting upon us. And in that sense, we're going to heal ourselves up. We're going to bring the happiness to the commoners, to the masses. So that was the idea.
Right, I'm trying to let me try and clarify a few things. I mean, these initial pioneers of sex education, were they explicit in saying that their purpose was to generate dissatisfaction?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Well, that's a very thing which is. I'm being baffled by the thing, but to be honest, how it is being kind of put it under the cloth and keep it as a secret. At the same time, you have all the books. You can just go and grab a book, and well, you can pick up any book of any Marxist from the 19th or 20th century, and they will be bluntly explicit, saying that the goal for the Marxism is it's not to dismantle the reality because they have a better proposal. The goal is to dismantle the reality, to destroy the current state of affairs, because they believe that there is some undescribed, very ununderstood, and not even touched greatness within ourselves that would kind of emerge automatically. Their thing, the very source of Marxism thinking is we have to destroy everything that is suppressing us, and it's keeping us at the bay, while in fact as a human beings we are like gods. We are capable to do whatever we want. It's just the suppression keeping us from doing so.
Right. I've got two contradictory things in my mind now. On the one hand, that their stated goal is to produce dissatisfaction, or to remove a condolence, if you like, so that people become more dissatisfied and are more likely to respond to appeals to revolutionary change, whatever. Okay, so I get that side. But on the other hand, the nature of the sex education would also seem to me to be along the lines of this is removing a repression. So therefore, wouldn't they believe that would be beneficial for people? Why do they believe that removing this suppression is going to make people more dissatisfied?
Well, it's a beautiful point that you just made, because I absolutely agree with you. I think that it wasn't actually thought through very well, and it is a contradiction. Wilhelm Reib's claim was that the way to achieve the state in which the current state of affairs are going to be rejected is achievable through introduction of the sexual education. But he never actually thought, or he never hoped to improve quality of life or quality of relation between people in their sexual intercourses. His hope was that there is a suppression in the world, and the unique thing that Wilhelm Reim kind of added was that the suppression is based on the suppression prior to this very overwhelming suppression of our life, which was introduced into our kids in keeping them away from sexuality. So his claim was this, that the very cause that we accept being suppressed as rational beings, well, one thing I might say was good about all these Marxists was that they still claim that there is some rationality in individuals. So I'll grant them that. But he was saying this: if we are rational beings and we're still actually choosing tyrants to be our governance, as he was referring to, let's say, 1934 elections in the Weimar Republic of Germany, in which the vast majority of the citizens elected Hitler as their leader. And then he was saying why those people are choosing or electing a guy or a person who would actually suppress more of their liberties. Why is this happening? And his answer to this question was because those people were suppressed at the early age in their sexuality.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's a theory that I assume has got no credible foundation at all. So in that sense, what was the idea that by introducing the sex education, they could present a message to a new generation that causes dissatisfaction among them, makes them see themselves as a repressed group, as sexually repressed, and that's the way it generates the dissatisfaction, and they present their new worldview as the solution to it.
If I may, I will be, in my opinion, a good response to your question or to your concern if you'd allow me to quote it's going to be a one sentence only from one of the books of the Wilhelm Reich. I hope that will explain it all. It's a book called A History of Sexuality, and in this book he's stating suppression of the natural sexuality in a child, particularly of its genital sexuality, makes the child apprehensive, shy, obedient, afraid of authority, good and adjusted in the authoritarian sense. It paralyzes the rebellious forces because any rebellion is laden with anxiety. It produces, by inhabiting sexual curiosity and sexual thinking in the child, a general inhibition of thinking of critical faculties. In brief, the goal of sexual suppression is that of producing an individual who is adjusted to the authoritarian order and who will submit to it in spite of all miserliness and degeneration. Initially, the child has to submit to the structure of the authoritarian miniature state, the family that he referred as a miniature state. A family in his mind was just a little state. Which process make it capable of lateral subordination to the general authoritarian system. So you see, his claim was this: the family, or mainly the parents, are suppressing the sexuality in the child, and in that doing, they are kind of allowing him to get used to the fact that he's going to be suppressed in adult life as well, because the life is nothing else but just acceptance of being subordinated.
Yeah, oh, that's fascinating. I would say I've heard similar lines to that quite recently, presented the other way around, though. More the idea that if you can get people to be like rule breakers in terms of their personal relationships and their sexuality, they're defying conventions. And if someone's in that habit, then that is going to carry over into the rest of their life, and they're generally going to be resistant to authority and be willing to be rebellious, etc.
Yeah.
And some people see that quite explicitly as a positive goal. I mean, for example, the government-funded Scottish Book Trust published books for children a couple of years ago now on the theme of rebellion. And the message was clearly that being a rebel is a good thing. The message wasn't rebelling against bad things is good, rebelling against good things is bad. The message was rebellion is a virtue. The more rebellious you are, the better a person you are. And I think there are people who do hold, they maybe wouldn't state it explicitly, but they do hold a value system that includes that belief. And I think that they quite rightly believe that if they can influence someone's approach to sexuality, since sexuality is so core to someone's being, then if they can establish convention-defying, authority-defying rebelliousness in that area of life, it's likely to influence their approach to every other issue as well. Yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. So how did it develop? What was people's response to this? I mean, was there a pushback against it?
Response to the book of Wilhelm Reich was a gentleman named Georgi Lukács, and he was an open Marxist. He was a Marxist, 100% supporting the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 in Russia, and he was absolutely convinced that this is the ultimateness of the human thought, or the human path of development. That was the Bolshevik Revolution, was the top of the top. That was the end of the history, as you know, the Hegel claimed that he actually managed to describe the end of the history. To some sense, you might claim that he was a little bit right, because we can't see any a significant addition to the philosophy since Hegel, or I cannot, at least, and I'm trying desperately to find some. But so the Georgi Lukács, he was a minister of education in Hungary in 1920s, and he was the first actually an individual who made the ideas of Wilhelm Reich and Sigmund Freud alive. So he was actually the first who made the whole process going. And in 1923, he introduced a sexual education to all pupils in the Austro-Hungarian at that time empire. Well, it's not Austro-Hungary because I think it collapsed in 1918. So I'm sorry. I've made a little mistake, but it was just after. So you need to keep in mind that the mentality of the people was really kind of still there. And he introduced the sexual education. It was vastly rejected. And it took him 7 months or 8 months, not even a year for sure, to withdraw all of his policies, because the parents were enormously rejecting this idea of introducing those concepts to their child, and the idea of parental right to bring in or bring out the child accordingly to their own beliefs was still so powerful, and the right of family was still so embedded in the mentality of the people back there that they couldn't stand a year of this idea. And he actually found himself out of the office within a few months after introducing those policies. So that was
So
a
what was
very
the
beginning.
content? What was the content of the syllabus? At what age? Do you know any details about it?
Oh, yes. Well, so it started at the age of 11. It was not as extreme as it is today, to say. It started at the age of 11, and in the age of 11, the kids were introduced into the concept of the relation between men and women, in which the both should fulfill the same parts, the same roles. So the very traditional concept that the men and women are different, and they should supplement themselves in the sense of creating something uniquely different, a unity, but considered as a third being, as something else. This is the traditional way of thinking about the family, that you have a woman and a man, and they are absolutely different. In order to be equal, you have to be different, otherwise you're just the same, you're just alike. So in order to be equal, you have to, by definition, be different. And in this difference, the claim was that they are bringing two very different approaches. One was rational and the other was emotional, more empathic, more person kind of focused onto how the other persons that we are implementing our policies to, in this regard, children, how they're going to respond to it, and having some consideration how they respond to it. That was the female part in this whole concept. They are capable of producing something uniquely different, not matched to, or neither the man nor the women. It was something very unique. And in this environment, that's the best environment for the child to be brought in, because despite the sex that you're thinking that the child was, it needed had a proper tools to respond to the very other sex, if he would hope to have and establish his own family in the future. And that was the whole concept. And in the age of 11, the sexual education by Georgi Lukács was focused on the fact that the man should perform the women's task, and the women should perform the men's task, or they should kind of try to do so. And that is the best way to go. That is the most thing that we should grant, or that we should empathize as the best way to go. And it was rejected.
That's very similar to the Scottish government's curriculum, right?
Yes.
From nursery. I mean, what about the some more explicitly sexual? That's like a gender roles message. Was there more explicitly sexual message as well?
No, it didn't went that extreme to say that it was introduced to the children as it is today of 9, right, to describe in details a sexual interaction between adult men and women. So it didn't went that far. But I'd claim only because the parents just rejected it at the very first glance. So they never had a chance, and most likely they would actually come with those ideas further in the line. But The thing is to kind of teach children that the only and the best way for men is to try to be women, and for the best way for women in order to achieve happiness and some sort of balance within the family is to try to become a man. That was the key point that made the citizens of Hungary to absolutely reject this idea. It was absolutely well. But that being said, I need to add one thing, because it is a theory of history, and it was introduced by Hegel, Friedrich Hegel, the German philosopher, mid 19th century, that we all have. His ideas are so powerful, and that they are being kind of smuggled through the educational system that we all went through, that it's hard for us to get rid of it. And his idea was this, that a history of humanity can be referred as an ideal correspondence to the history of development of one individual's life, in which you have your stages of infancy, and then you have a stage of childhood, adolescence, and coming into adulthood. And this is the way that we have been kind of introduced the history, like, and this is the way that it's very important. I know it sounds odd, but this is how people think that the previous things were, that the generations, 2, 3, 4 generations back from ours were kind of childish. They didn't understood the things or the world to the degree we understand it now. So we can claim that they were childish. And more further you're going to go into history, the more you're going to be going into the stage of infancy. Like let's say Middle Ages, it was a pure infancy. Those people were absolutely mad. But this is not, this is just one of the ideas. It's an idea of a one particular philosopher than the very other philosopher that is very commonly uh, 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 being in kind of sorry, let's say understood or regarded as important was Arthur Schopenhauer, and he disagreed with Hegel as much as he could. He will basically Schopenhauer, the father of heuristics, and the way we talk to each other and the way we see the dialogue today. He was basically claiming that Hegel had no idea what he was talking about, and this is all madness. So, but we still have this kind of approach, and it is still delivered via the educational system to our kids, which I can absolutely see in my own kids. I am a father of 2 daughters, and absolutely I can see that both of my poor kids are being kind of exposed to this exact kind of thinking.
Could I just say, I've got a bit rusty on doing the live stream. I've forgotten to bring the comments up at the side of my screen, and I can see that there have been lots and lots of comments. I'll look at some of those in a minute, and we'll maybe discuss them. Looking at the time, we have got 2 topics we're hoping to cover. I think we're going to just manage one this evening. Yeah. We can save the other one for another time. What I've learned tonight, I've got a book on my shelf about comments about women from Marx and Engels and Stalin and Lenin. And it's very much, I mean, it's not too different than you'd hear Nicola Sturgeon or virtually any other politician in Britain saying. It's the same sort of emphasis. And I thought to myself, where did that come from? What preceded it? But you've given some insight into that, into this, the sort of thinking and the sort of motivation behind it was brewing in other thinkers.
If I can say one thing, Richard, and that thing is this: if we are going to be focusing on every single decision that our opponents are making, and that we're going to highlight how damaging those decisions are, in reality, what we are doing, we are enforcing the drive for our opponents to carry on. because we have to understand one thing. This is exactly the goal. The thing that we are so much afraid of, that they are going to destroy the civilization that we're living in. This is the exact goal they want to achieve. So more we are highlighting how damageful they are, the more we are giving them a drive to carry on.
So these sex education pioneers, was their message that women are oppressed, or that everyone is sexually repressed, or was it both? Was it a bit of both?
Well, they never actually focused that much about women, and that's another thing. They never cared about the woman that much at that point. What they were claiming was this, that and I cannot explain why. This is beyond the capacity of my reasoning to explain why. But the claim was this, that we are being... despite the fact that we are irrational beings, as Horkheimer, for instance, in his books, described as, we have this thrill, this thing that we just cannot get rid of. Like, if somebody only, obviously referring to a free people capable of some reasoning, that if you're being exposed to the argument better than the one that you can present, you're gonna have the aha moment, that you're gonna say, oh my God, yes, you are right, I was wrong, and from now on I will align myself with yours way of thinking, because you just presented the arguments which I can still say are better than the arguments that I had at hand. And the very recognition of this phenomenon for those Marxists was the justification to claim that we are irrational beings. But if we are rational beings, how come we are capable to organize ourselves or to elect people who are tyrannical, who are just a people that trying to utilize our efforts and our labor into their own benefit? How these two things can add up together? And then you have a very talented thinker, Herbert Marcuse. I don't know. He was a celebrity in 1960s in the United States. I don't know if he was as much popular in Britain, but he was on the cover of Times at some point. He was a real celebrity, and he wrote a few books. One particular, which I strongly recommend everybody to read, was Repressive Tolerance. That's the title of the book. And in this book, he basically kind of explained, or he first of all, he gave us a few examples in which he criticized that even if you have on individual level an irrational approach, the result of the sum of rational approaches made on the individual level might result in irrational state considered on the public level, on the level of society, on the level of group. And he made a few very good examples. Like, to give you one, he used a theory of games, the very hardcore logic, and the games theory, he said, was this: if imagine that you have 100 sheep, and you have your friend who has 100 sheep as well, and you have only a field capable to feed 100 sheep. What are you gonna do? So if you're gonna apply an individual reasoning, the most reasonable thing for you to do is to introduce your sheep into the means of getting food as fast as possible, because that's the only way you can make sure that the most majority of a sheep will survive. And if both are going to apply the same reasoning, the result is that at least half of the sheep are going to die, or not even all of them, because if none of the sheep will receive the amount of food necessary for it to survive, they will all die. So you're going to have a situation in which both approaches are rational, and the result is absolutely irrational. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So his criticism was brilliant, but his response wasn't actually that brilliant, because his response to it was this: so now we have to apply irrationality. His response was immediate. He said, if rationality on the individual basis is causing irrational results on the general level, therefore we have to apply irrational approaches on the individual level in order to get the rational results on the group level. And
yeah, which is just nonsense, isn't it? Because
it's just naive, yes.
if someone takes an individual decision that's ultimately not going to fulfill the ends that they're seeking, then that's not rational. It's
of course,
more rational.
I can even claim that you cannot actually describe rational thinking in terms of just seeing yourself on the world and just yourself. That's not actually a stage in which you can describe a rational thinking. If I have you
conflating rationality with selfishness.
Oh yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's have a look at a few comments here. We've got one from Hugh. I know Hugh well. Welcome, Hugh. It's more that the great hoodwink of today is the fact that the neoliberal corporate establishment have convinced young people that they're rebelling by embracing sexual license. What do you think of that, Jacob?
There is actually some truth in it, and I will agree to it, because there is this urge, and it's actually related to a teenage stage of life in which people are trying to develop a tools or means in which they would be or convince themselves that they are capable to making any decisions as a comparison to the stage in which they were only 100% dependent from the parents. So you have a childish state in which you are absolutely dependent on the decisions of your parents, and you want to become an adult in sense that you want to become somebody capable to make your own decisions. At some point, you'd need to start challenging the decisions of your parents, even if they're correct, because you need to learn how it is like to have a different approach, and an approach which is unique. So the rebel portion of being a teenager is a valuable thing, and I'm saying it. I hope my both daughters ain't gonna hear it, but that's actually the truth.
It's this brother in Scotland. I mean, I would say teenage rebellion is sort of largely dead, because what they're taught at school is, go out and get drunk, dabble in drugs, have sex with who you feel like. I mean, that's the message from school,
which is nothing but rebellion. This is
the other part of the message is, the way to be good. That's go on the climate change demonstration and whatever. Be anti-racist by our definition. So that's the message presenting. And all, in the vast majority of cases, young people think that they're on the cutting edge of rebellion by doing exactly what the authority figures in their life
absolutely agree.
I quite agree with you. I mean, it's almost miraculous that this
and I absolutely agree. Yes, and you just nailed it. Absolutely, I would only agree to it. So we have to appreciate the complexity and the brilliance in our opponents' minds. The game they're playing is absolutely uniquely incredible. They are utilizing the things which are natural in human beings and make those natural responses of ourselves working to their benefit. You would need to be blind not to see how incredibly brilliant this approach is, but how brilliantly this thing is being portrayed or orchestrated. At the result, we are not getting what we expected. So we have now kids aligning themselves with a policy of the great power, and they never actually go through this stage of rebellion. They think they do, but they do not. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But having said that, I mean, there are teenagers, there are young people who do take a different view. I mean, they go through their education, seeing the problems with it, seeing the biases in it. I mean, we hear from them. I heard from a boy today who sent me some pictures of what's on the wall at the school. I mean, so it's not all of them. But I think in general, what I've been saying true. Let's look at this one last comment, then we'll finish on time. Right, Rachel. The very problem now, as I say, this is a parent of a 16-year-old, The schools have conditioned the children at this age to think they're repressed if they're not being taught about being non-binary, trans, etc. Yeah, I would agree completely. But that is the situation that's being created, is they really think that their rights, in general, their rights are being denied, and something really is seriously far wrong if this message isn't promoted and plastered over every wall.
If I can produce a one thought about this particular comment, and forgive me because I'm gonna kind of sail away from the content of the comment, but I'm gonna stick to the kind of merit, to the essence of it. And in the essence, I get it in this way. It's our relation to the truth. It's our relation to understanding what is the relation between being a free and aligning with the truth. And this is the core. Like, if I'm choosing to be a free man, therefore, by definition or by logic, I am enslaving myself, and I do it deliberately, willingly. I enslave myself to the truth, because the only way I can be a free man is to follow the truth. But the concept of enslaving yourself willingly into anything is unconceivable. And there are reasons why those people think that way. There are multiple reasons in which they are needing to dismantle the existence of God. Otherwise, those things wouldn't be even possible to happen. But that's the core reality. If I choose to be a free man, capable of independent reasoning, therefore I have to enslave myself to the truth. And each time I'm being exposed to the truth, I will obey. I will admit, this is the hardcore aha moment, and you are right, I was wrong. Only then I can be a free man. Otherwise, I'm just being indoctrinated and copying someone else's thoughts into probably his own benefit without knowing. That's the alternative.
Yeah, I wish we could package that and put it on TikTok, and every young person in Scotland watch it. Yes, well, that was a fascinating discussion. I say we got through one out of our two topics. The other topic, just to let you know, we'll do it. We're booked up for quite a while now, but at some point in the future. And that was talking about the 7 categories of civilizations in the world, according to a particular theorist, and how the developments in the Western world here in Scotland relate to those historic civilizations and their strengths and weaknesses. It was going to be very interesting, but we'll save that for another day. Say apologies again for forgetting about the comments, because there have been lots and lots. We normally try and interact with them a bit more than that. But next week, I will remember to bring the comments in and bring more of you into the discussion. Right, we will wind up there. So, Jakub, thank you very much. Fascinating discussion. I've learned a few things and moved on in my thinking in a few areas tonight. So that's what it's all about. So thank you.
The pleasure was all mine, and I only can express my gratitude for allowing me to take a part in this project and to be here and to introduce my way of thinking into a broad audience. And I only can say thank you, Richard. The pleasure was all mine.
So if you're watching, if you're not a member of the family party, do join Jakub as a member. Sign up online. Jakub, just very quickly to finish off, are you going to the meeting? You probably didn't know about it, actually. The meeting in Peterhead on the 3rd of September?
Oh, yes, I will. 100%.
And Aberdeen on the 8th of October?
Yes, indeed, as well.
So come along and have a chat to Jakub in person at those meetings if you're in that area.
Oh,
right, thanks very much, everyone, and see you next week. And
thank you again, and thank you for everybody who is watching us.
Right, good night.